Big mistake. Michelle Caroline shuts her down on national TV. That morning's episode of The View began like any other. But when Michelle Obama walked onto the stage, there was something different in her posture. Calm, yes, but with a heaviness that carried through the room. She didn't open with a speech. She told a story about a child separated from her father at the border, about her husband, once president, who couldn't sleep for nights after reading the report. The audience grew still, and then she said quietly, "We're moving backward, not from policy to progress, but from compassion to concrete." That line echoed. By nightfall, Karoline Leavitt, now White House press secretary, appeared on CNN's America Tonight. Her voice was steady, her message was clear. Mrs. Obama is entitled to her opinion. But I carry a responsibility to speak for thousands of families who once prayed not for speeches but for safety. The studio lights dimmed just slightly. Anderson Cooper adjusted in his chair. For a brief moment, even the air slowed down. Two women stood at opposite sides of the table. One carried memory, the other mandate. And as the cameras rolled, it became clear this wouldn't be a debate. It would be a mirror, held up to the soul of a country still deciding who do we protect. The invitation had come swiftly. Within hours of Michelle Obama's remarks on The View, CNN issued a formal call, a primetime televised forum. The title was simple but charged: America Tonight, a conversation on compassion and policy. By evening, the set was arranged. The backdrop was muted, navy framed with American flags. At the center stood a long wooden table, polished to a quiet gleam. 2 chairs, no podiums, no raised voices expected, at least not yet. Anderson Cooper arrived first. Calm, practiced, yet his steps felt slower. He reviewed his cue cards, then looked out into the audience. Veterans, immigrant mothers, former ICE officers, teachers, grandparents. Some clutched small American flags, others copies of the Constitution. A silence held the room before the broadcast. Karoline Leavitt entered with quiet precision. Dressed in a navy suit, her hair tied back, she carried no briefcase, just a single manila folder. She nodded to Cooper, then sat down. Her hands rested neatly on the table. She did not check her phone. A moment later, Michelle Obama stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple blue dress, her wedding band catching the light. Her expression was measured. She offered a quiet smile to the audience, then to Cooper, then to Leavitt. Then she sat. The red light above camera 1 blinked to life. Anderson Cooper leaned forward slightly. "Good evening." Tonight's conversation comes at a moment of national tension. Earlier today, former First Lady Michelle Obama spoke about immigration unity and leadership. Her words sparked widespread discussion. With us now are Mrs. Obama and White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. He paused briefly. "Mrs. Obama, you spoke about a nation losing its compassion. Would you like to begin?" Michelle nodded. Her voice, when it came, was steady but low. "Thank you, Anderson. I came here not to argue, but to remind. I think we forget sometimes that policy is not numbers. It's people. It's children, parents, veterans. I told a story this morning about a father who was taken from his daughter at the border. That child didn't understand laws or security. She just wanted her dad to come home." She glanced gently toward the crowd. "And when we harden our laws so much that we forget the hearts inside those homes, then we're not being strong, we're being cold." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cooper let the silence stretch. Then he turned. "Ms. Leavitt." Caroline folded her hands. "Thank you, Anderson. And thank you, Mrs. Obama." She turned to the former First Lady. "I appreciate your story, but as someone who now serves in this administration, I see a different part of the country. I see mothers who lost children to fentanyl smuggled across our border. I see law enforcement officers attending funerals of colleagues killed by undocumented criminals. I don't say that to diminish your grief, but to add to it." She paused, opened the manila folder slowly. 1 sheet. "This is an ICE report from last quarter. 137 criminal deportations. 73% had violent crime records. These are not peaceful families being removed. These are threats being addressed. The audience shifted again. A veteran in the third row leaned forward. Michelle didn't interrupt. She waited, then replied, "I've read that report too, and I'm not denying that we must be safe. But safety without humanity isn't security, it's surveillance. We are not machines, we are a people. And I've met mothers who lost sons to gang violence, yes. But I've also met children who still wake up screaming because ICE took their parents in the middle of the night." Cooper interjected, "What do you say, Mrs. Obama, to those who believe that stronger enforcement is the only answer?" Michelle answered slowly, "I say we've tried strong, let's try smart." Leavitt leaned forward slightly. "What does smart look like, ma'am, to you?" Michelle turned. "Smart looks like knowing the difference between a father trying to find work and a trafficker trying to exploit. Smart means investing in processing, not punishment. It means seeing a refugee not as a threat, but as someone escaping one." A long pause followed. A former teacher in the front row clutched a handkerchief. Someone else wiped a tear. Then Leavitt said, "And what if one mistake? One person who slipped through kills a child in Ohio. Do we tell that mother we tried compassion?" Michelle didn't flinch. "We tell her we did everything possible to be both firm and fair. That we respected her grief, but didn't let it become national revenge." Silence, no clapping, just stillness. Cooper looked to the camera. "We'll return after this break." But no one moved. Even off air, the tension remained. The return from commercial break was quiet. Anderson Cooper sat poised, his hands folded on the table. Michelle Obama and Karoline Leavitt sat as they had before, unchanged in posture, but the room had shifted. The audience, older and largely attentive, seemed caught between breath and judgment. Cooper resumed, "We've heard two deeply personal accounts, one of compassion, one of protection. Let's go deeper." He looked to Leavitt. "Ms. Leavitt, you referenced national data and ICE reports. But some critics argue that selective enforcement harms more families than it protects. How do you reconcile that?" Karoline Leavitt took a quiet breath. "With respect, I believe we have to begin with honesty. Our nation faces a border crisis. I'm not here to blame the past, but I represent an administration elected to secure the present. When our officers apprehend individuals with criminal records, it's not cruelty, it's duty." She looked directly at Michelle. "I don't dispute your sincerity, but I don't believe your solutions work in practice." Michelle responded with calm, "And I respect your intent, Ms. Leavitt, but policy without empathy becomes machinery. I've seen communities where fear now lives, where neighborhood watch used to be, where church pews are empty not because of disinterest, but deportation." There was a soft hum in the crowd. A retired pastor shifted in his seat. Leavitt opened her folder again. "May I read one sentence, Mrs. Obama?" Michelle nodded. Karoline began. "On March 3, 2025, a 14-year-old boy in El Paso was killed during a home robbery. The accused, two undocumented individuals with prior detainment notices, were released due to sanctuary policy." She looked up. "That mother will never hear her son laugh again. We didn't fail to feel, we failed to act." The weight landed. Michelle looked downward for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I visited El Paso. I met with community leaders. That case was a tragedy. No mother should face that loss. But blaming every immigrant for the sins of a few is not justice. It's fear masquerading as clarity." Leavitt sat still. "Fear may be unpleasant, but sometimes it's warranted." Michelle returned, "And sometimes it's weaponized." The camera panned slowly across the audience. A woman in the third row clutched a silver cross. A man in a U.S. Navy hat looked on unmoving. Cooper held up a hand gently. "Let's talk solutions. Mrs. Obama, if you were in office today, what would you do?" Michelle's voice steadied. "I would increase resources at ports of entry, not build more walls. I'd fund immigration courts to reduce wait times. I'd invest in border technology, not brute force. And I would ensure that any child who calls this country home is treated with dignity, not suspicion." Cooper turned to Leavitt. She replied quickly, "That sounds good on a speech card. But I ask, how do you stop the fentanyl? How do you prevent the MS-13 recruitment? We've got to draw a line somewhere." Mrs. Obama. Michelle answered, "You draw a line with precision, not with a bulldozer. You don't assume everyone's guilty just because they crossed a border. We are a nation of laws, but also of mercy." The studio dimmed for a moment as graphics flashed briefly viewer comments from across the country. Watching from Iowa, respect to both women. North Carolina, my son died of overdose. I support Leavitt. Seattle, compassion isn't weakness. Back in studio, the tension grew more intimate. Karoline sat forward, voice lowering. I understand you met with DACA students this month. Michelle nodded. Yes, bright young people. Teachers, medics, future lawyers. Leavitt asked. And if the law says they're undocumented? Michelle replied, then the law must catch up to the reality. They grew up here. This is their home. Even if their parents broke the law, especially then. We don't punish children for their parents' past. We don't criminalize hope. The crowd murmured again. Then silence. Cooper allowed a long pause. Ms. Leavitt. Final thought before we shift to public questions. Leavitt's tone softened. I don't relish enforcement. I respect the law. And I believe safety is the beginning of dignity, not its enemy. But I'll say this, if we continue to ignore the victims of failed policy, then the border doesn't just divide nations. It divides our conscience. Michelle looked across the table. Then let's build policy that doesn't demand we choose one grief over another. The studio froze. Anderson Cooper leaned in. After the break, we opened the floor to audience voices. The red light above the camera flickered again. The red light blinked again. They were live. Anderson Cooper turned slowly toward the audience. Tonight we open the floor to those in this room. Fathers, teachers, veterans, survivors. The conversation shifts now to lived experience. A producer nodded. A microphone moved through the aisle. The first speaker was a woman in her 70s. Her hands trembled slightly. My name is Elena Rodriguez. My husband served in Korea. I taught for 32 years. 2 of my grandchildren are DACA recipients. 1 wants to be a nurse. 1 wants to teach civics. She paused. I've lived through many presidents. Some were gentle, some were strong, but never have I feared my family would be erased by a policy memo. She looked at Leavitt. Please remember, papers don't raise children. People do. The room exhaled as one. Karoline nodded respectfully. Thank you, ma'am. Next came a man in uniform, retired Army. I lost a nephew to a drug runner near Laredo. He was 16. That fentanyl didn't cross itself. His voice cracked. I understand compassion, but compassion didn't bring my nephew back. Walls might have. Michelle clasped her hands gently. Sir, I'm so sorry for your loss. We may differ on solutions, but never on sorrow. The man nodded. Thank you, that matters. Then came a third voice, a young woman, soft-spoken, early 20s. My name is Daniela. I was brought here when I was 4. I didn't speak English until I was 7. My mother cleaned houses. My father worked 3 jobs. She looked at Cooper, then to the nation. I volunteer at a veterans hospital. I pay taxes. I know all 50 state capitals. And I still wake up afraid ICE will take my parents. The camera lingered on her face. Steady, brave. Anderson's voice quieted. You are heard, Daniela. Another man raised his hand. A farmer from rural Ohio. I'm not political. I just want to be safe. I locked my doors after the news told me about gangs. That shouldn't be normal. Michelle leaned slightly forward. No one should feel unsafe. But let's not let headlines do what neighbors used to build trust. We have to see each other again. He considered that. We used to leave our doors open in the summer. Now we keep floodlights and locks. It's not just immigrants. It's everything. But when it comes to policy, I just want us to be careful because we can't undo what's done. Then a fourth speaker rose, a grandmother from North Carolina. She held a folded flag in her lap. My name is Ruth. My son died overseas. I raised his daughter Rosa. She's 10. Her mother was undocumented but kind. She made cakes for the neighbors, walked elderly neighbors home. She was taken in a raid last year. My granddaughter cries every night. She looked at Leavitt. I'm not asking for politics. I'm asking for peace. Please let our laws know the faces they affect. Leavitt stood for a moment, then stepped forward slightly. Ma'am, I thank you for your son's service. And I see the burden you carry. These stories matter. Then came a final voice. A boy no older than 10, his mother held his hand. He stepped to the mic. "My name is Joshua. My dad was deported last year. I didn't know what deported meant. Now I do. It means he's not at my soccer games." The studio froze. Michelle's face bent not into sadness but listening. Leavitt swallowed hard. Joshua spoke again. "I just want to know if he's coming back, or if America means we don't get second chances." Silence. No applause, no hashtags, just eyes locked across generations. Cooper cleared his throat but didn't interrupt. Michelle finally said, "Joshua, I can't promise what others decide, but I can tell you you are not forgotten, and you are loved." Karoline added, "And you are not invisible. I see you. Even if I disagree with some policies, I see you." Joshua nodded, then returned to his seat. His mother squeezed his shoulder. Anderson Cooper's voice returned. "We're going to take a short pause, but when we return, final thoughts from both of our guests, and perhaps the beginning of something more." The lights dimmed again. Behind the scenes, producers whispered about viewership. Phones buzzed. Hashtags rose. But in that room, nothing moved. The air was thick, not with controversy but consequence. Every eye had seen something that could not be unseen, and the question lingered. What kind of country listens not just to arguments, but to aching voices? As the lights faded and the cameras paused, the energy in the studio did not recede. Behind the scenes, phones buzzed with national reactions, news anchors scrambled to reframe their evening coverage, and producers stood still, eyes fixed on the stage. When the red light blinked again, Anderson Cooper's voice returned, measured but tinged with gravity. "We return now to closing thoughts. We've heard pain, we've heard duty, we've seen the consequences, and now we ask what next." Michelle Obama and Karoline Leavitt sat still. No posturing, no rehearsed gestures, just two women seated across from each other with the weight of a nation between them. Cooper continued, "Mrs. Obama, I'd like to begin with you. In one sentence, what do you want this country to remember tonight?" Michelle didn't blink. "That compassion is not the opposite of security. It's the beginning of it." Leavitt nodded slightly. "I respect that." Anderson turned. "Ms. Leavitt." Karoline took a breath. "That safety is not cruelty. It's a promise made to every citizen who goes to bed, hoping their door stays closed until morning." Cooper allowed a full 10 seconds of silence. Then, what would it take for these two visions to coexist? Michelle answered first. "Humility. The kind that lets us admit we don't know everything. The kind that listens." Karoline followed. "And courage. The courage to stand firm, but not hard. There's a difference." A voice rose gently from the front row. Ruth, the grandmother, was still there. She raised a wrinkled hand. "Couldn't we just write that down, the humility, the courage, put it in our schools again?" A few in the audience nodded, even some tears. And then something unexpected. Karoline stood. "Mrs. Obama," she said, "I have disagreed with many things you've said tonight, but I cannot disagree with your sincerity. I know what it is to sit in a chair that burns, and I know what it means to carry more stories than time allows. So thank you for showing up." Michelle stood as well. "And I thank you for staying in the seat. It's easy to leave when it gets hard. It means something that you didn't." Anderson looked between them. "You both came into this room prepared to defend your sides, but you leave with something more, maybe not agreement, but recognition." From the back of the studio came a soft sound, clapping. Slow, respectful. It spread forward. Veterans, grandmothers, young immigrants, skeptical farmers, all clapping, not because there had been a winner, but because something had been faced, together. And then something even rarer in political television, the two women shook hands. Not for the camera, for the country. As the credits rolled, Anderson Cooper's voice returned in voiceover. "Tonight we saw not the end of a debate, but the beginning of a reckoning. One that requires facts, yes, but also memory. Not just vigilance, but grace. The question is no longer who speaks louder, but who listens longer." The screen faded to black. But in homes across America, on kitchen radios, smart TVs, and handheld phones, people stayed quiet, stayed watching, because something had shifted. In the days that followed, reactions poured in. Churches played the broadcast during community forums. Police departments scheduled meetings with immigrant advocacy groups. a veterans group invited both women to speak on civic duty. College students posted discussion threads about reconciliation and responsibility. Civic educators distributed transcripts to high school classrooms nationwide. Public libraries added the program to their civil dialogue archives. In a Pennsylvania diner, 3 retirees who hadn't agreed on politics in 15 years sat together and watched the rerun. I didn't like either side, one said, but I liked that they listened. In Oklahoma, a pastor replaced Sunday's sermon with a reflection on courage and humility. In Arizona, a sheriff's office began a review of community liaison practices. And in Chicago, a boy named Joshua wrote a letter read aloud on NPR. My dad is still not home, but last night America felt closer. Thank you. Michelle received the letter. So did Karoline. They each wrote back. Michelle's letter was handwritten, folded with care. Karoline's was typed, signed in blue ink. Neither read the other's reply, but both ended their letter the same way. We see you, and across the country, one by one, people started writing back. Letters, emails, notes pinned on community boards. Some said thank you, some said please do more, some said it's a start. But nearly all said this: we watched, we listened, now we hope. The network reran the segment twice that weekend. By Monday, it had been translated into Spanish, Vietnamese, Arabic, and Mandarin. Community centers screened it like a town hall. Small bookstores stacked printed transcripts at the checkout. Something had been said, seen, and few wanted it to fade into the noise of the next news cycle. In the White House press room, Karoline Leavitt returned to her podium. She looked more composed than ever, but the edge of performance had softened. A reporter asked whether she regretted appearing on live television alongside a former First Lady. No, she replied. I think the country needed to see that 2 women could fiercely disagree and still make space for each other. Will there be follow-up discussions? Another asked. Karoline nodded. I've reached out, not for debate, for collaboration. We owe it to the people who trusted us enough to listen. That same day, Michelle Obama held a private discussion with a group of bipartisan educators in Washington, D.C. The session lasted 3 hours. The theme was compassionate citizenship. I'm not running for anything, Michelle said, but that doesn't mean I can't run toward a better conversation. The moment between them, the handshake, the mutual acknowledgement, sparked something larger. Not unity in ideology, but a national hunger for decency. In one Midwest church, a Sunday school teacher printed excerpts from the dialogue and invited children to rewrite them in their own words. What does compassion mean to you? She asked. The children drew houses with open doors, flags with stitched hearts. In Texas, a border town mayor quoted Michelle's line, "We don't criminalize hope," during a local council meeting. In Florida, a state senator cited Leavitt's phrase, "Safety is not cruelty, it's a promise," when drafting amendments to a refugee housing bill. In North Carolina, Ruth, the grandmother, was invited to speak at a civic gathering. She brought with her a simple poster board, humility, courage, put it in our schools again. C-SPAN aired it live. Ratings spiked. 1 week later, the Department of Education commissioned a pilot curriculum titled Civic Empathy Lessons from Dialogue. It included video from the event, excerpts of testimony, and journal prompts for students to reflect on safety, fairness, and memory. Anderson Cooper, meanwhile, aired a follow-up special titled America Still Listening. He visited 3 towns across political divides, Ohio, California, and Mississippi, interviewing locals about the impact of the conversation. I didn't agree with everything, said one retired steelworker, but I respected the way they looked each other in the eye. In an online poll conducted days after the event, 63% of respondents said they'd be more likely to support candidates who publicly engage with opposing voices, not because it promised consensus, but because it modeled civility. And among younger voters aged 18 to 30, the numbers were even higher. A social media campaign launched with the tagline, "More listening, less shouting." Thousands of teachers shared it. So did veterans groups. So did former refugees. The dialogue also prompted an unexpected ripple in Congress. A bipartisan working group, previously dormant, reconvened under a new name, the Compassion Caucus. Its mission reframed policy conversations to include not just economic cost, but human consequence. One of the first topics they debated rewriting portions of immigration legislation, to allow for trauma screenings and family preservation clauses. When a journalist asked what inspired the group, one member held up a printout of Joshua's NPR letter. Sometimes, he said, we legislate better when we remember who's watching. Michelle Obama and Karoline Leavitt continued their work separately but often in parallel. Michelle began visiting community colleges and faith groups, speaking on democratic resilience. Karoline launched an initiative within the press office to host monthly listening sessions with citizens across the spectrum. No cameras, no recordings. Every angry letter, she said, starts with someone who didn't feel heard. The White House eventually hosted a forum called Voices at the Table, not a debate, a listening circle. There were factory workers, nurses, recent immigrants, war veterans, and teenagers. One question guided the event. What makes you feel safe? Answers varied. A paycheck I can count on. A streetlight that works. A neighbor who checks in. A country that says welcome. The transcript from that forum was published nationwide. Public libraries turned it into reading series. NPR adapted it into an audio documentary. An 8th grader from Oregon turned one answer into a poem that went viral. A flag is not a fence. It's a fabric that stretches. In Chicago, Joshua received a phone call, not from the government, but from a local soccer coach who had seen the program. We saved you a jersey, he said. Joshua wore it the next Saturday. His mother sat in the stands. Michelle Obama was not there. Neither was Leavitt. But someone brought a sign, "We see you, number 7. And Joshua smiled. That perhaps was the legacy of the night, not policy rewritten in haste, but a country recalibrating what it means to hear. No one won that debate, because it wasn't a debate. It was a remembering, a beginning. Months passed, and still the echo of that night traveled far beyond the walls of the CNN studio. What began as a televised conversation had morphed into a cultural milestone, referenced in classrooms, quoted in legislation, and imitated in town halls. It became known simply as the night we listened. In Michigan, a civics teacher started every Monday with 5 minutes of silence, followed by a prompt, "What would you say if the nation paused to hear you?" Students shared answers in writing anonymously. Many surprised even their teachers. I would say I feel invisible. I would ask my dad to come home. I would want leaders to listen like Mrs. Obama and Ms. Leavitt did. Church sermons, university lectures, and even late-night comedy monologues referenced that evening. And a phrase emerged worn on T-shirts and bumper stickers alike. Listening is a patriotic act. The Library of Congress archived the full transcript as part of its Democracy and Dialogue series. A university press published a commentary volume. Book clubs across generations used it to bridge gaps between older voters and Gen Z students. One librarian remarked, "It's the first time my politics shelf and poetry shelf came together." In Phoenix, a group of veterans and refugees co-hosted a potluck. The rule was simple, no arguments, only stories. And in Salt Lake City, a high school student body voted unanimously to rename their annual debate competition the Listening Invitational. Joshua's story continued too. His soccer team advanced to the city championship. A regional newspaper covered it. The headline read, "Hope scores a goal." When interviewed, Joshua said, "Only I play for my dad." Michelle Obama visited a small church in Baltimore, where she spoke quietly, not from a pulpit, but a folding chair. "We're not here to win debates," she said. "We're here to raise citizens." Karoline Leavitt, at a journalism conference in New Hampshire, delivered a keynote titled Press Power and Presence. She surprised attendees by focusing not on strategy, but silence. "The most powerful moment of my year," she said, "was when I had no words and just listened." Their paths crossed again, not on television, but in a letter exchange facilitated by a mutual colleague. It was private, but one sentence from each became public. Michelle wrote, "What we model is what we multiply." Karoline replied, "Grace doesn't cancel conviction, it contains it." Meanwhile, Voices at the Table evolved into a traveling forum. Each month a new state, a new room, a new circle. One featured a coal miner and a climate activist, another a police officer and a protester. The questions remained simple. What brought you here? What are you hoping for? What do you fear? One participant said, I came because I was tired of yelling at the TV. Another said, I came because I wanted my kids to see me try. In these rooms, laughter returned, not mockery release, even when tears followed, and over time, something else emerged: trust. Fragile, flickering, but real. News outlets stopped framing politics as war and began referring to civic tension. Schools adopted modules on conflict as connection. Anderson Cooper received a journalism award, but said, "The honor goes to the people who stayed in their seats that night." A mural appeared in Minneapolis depicting two women across a table, their hands reaching, not touching, but trying. Above them, words painted in bold, "We don't choose sides, we choose sight." That phrase became the unofficial motto of a new civic initiative launched across high schools, the SIGHT Project. It trained students to conduct peer interviews across differences. Its motto, ask, listen, reflect, respond, not debate, not defeat, just understand. By year's end, Congress revisited several policies, immigration, education, healthcare, not with immediate consensus, but with a rule each committee session would begin with 5 minutes of uninterrupted listening. The change was quiet and monumental. In his year-end address, the president referenced the night directly. There are moments that define us, and there are moments that refine us. This year we remembered what it means to hear one another. The camera cut to Joshua, now seated beside his mother in the gallery. He wore a tie, he looked older, wiser. He waved, America waved back, and so the echo continued, not as noise, but as a deeper note in the civic chord. Listening was no longer just polite, it was powerful, and the country, still divided, still noisy, began to hum with something older than outrage: hope. If this story moved you, if you believe listening still matters, leave a comment below, sharing what you would say if the nation paused to hear you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this conversation with someone who needs it. Let's keep the echo alive together.